Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are.
Welcome, one and all. It is time for the Books That Make You show, and I am your host, Desiree Duffy. And today we're talking about books that make you find the path for daily direction, whether you're a lady, a mother, a witch, or another. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Novelty Tins because they provide us with these amazing teas. We got Pikoi Pan, kind of like Peter Pan. Now I can't say it. As well as Pure Rabbit, like Peter Rabbit. And they have all different types of varieties. They're tea tins, and you can find out more about them on noveltytins.com. But right now, we're going to find out how exactly you get back up again after you fall down again and again. Suzie Newell is more than somebody with a doctorate specializing in coping mechanisms for women. She lost half of her family, half of her mind, and fell down hard. But she got back up again and again. And she's here to tell you that you can too. Her book is called The Path 365, a daily direction for ladies, mothers, witches, and others. It is a guide to daily direction that everyone can use. In other words, it's not steeped in religion or specific spiritual teaching. Instead, it uses real science to create activities that foster a healthy mindset and builds important feel-good hormones like dopamine and endorphins. Suzie has her doctorate specializing in coping mechanisms. She is a speaker and a nurse anesthesiologist. The work that she did on substance abuse has led her to the evidence revealed in image scanning, peer-reviewed research, and practical science about the way one copes affects the brain's ability to be happy. I love this topic, and I know there's so much for us to dig into because, Suzie, the science points to the fact that there's something there. Suzie Newell, hello, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I feel like my work is done. You've done a great job.
I set the stage, but okay, you're the one who's going to take the deep dive. And I love the premise of your book that we don't necessarily need religion or pseudoscience to find feel-good solution. The science is the science, and it's agnostic. Can you unwrap that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So I usually bust it down to mind, body, and spirit. And the way I do that is to explain, you kind of grew up with this sort of like, oh, mind, body, spirit, it's all very groovy. But the truth is the mind, the body, and the spirit work that you do actually increases the dopamines and the endorphins and helps to moderate your cortisol levels. So the work going into that helps. So if you're talking about the mind and you're unloading the mind, so say you go to counseling or you have a little path circle that you share, a little vulnerability circle with friends or whatever it is that you do to unload those things, that kind of lights up the dopamine, because every time you unload something, you can almost feel it. It's like people say it's a pressure off your chest. You're lighting up that dopamine. You're kind of opening up that way for feel good. Dopamine is a natural antidepressant. And so that the more of that you have, the more able to cope you are. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, body. But what I like to always point out here, that brings up the endorphins, and everybody does seem to know that. But what I like to point out here is that we're never going to tell you or talk to you about what you should be doing and how you should be doing it, because the idea is that if you're doing one little thing at a time and you're walking down this path, in 2 years, maybe you've lost 10 pounds, maybe you've lost 30, but that's not the goal. And that's not what you're supposed to be focusing on. What you're focusing on is fixing the soul, fixing who you are so that those things happen naturally. The healthier you get, the healthier you get. And then, of course, spirit is my favorite. Love to talk about that because I really struggled with it myself. I'm super intellectual. I might be a little bit on the spectrum. And so this deep dive for me, I mean, I was that jerk who would tell you that what you believed was wrong and here was why. And I really fell down hard and had to learn that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you believe. You have to learn to quiet the mind, and you have to learn to open up that dopamine. So the spirit work sustains your dopamine. It's the thing that keeps you from going into cyclical depressions and having those days where you just don't want to do anything. And so this is can be meditation, it can be prayer, it can be a sound bath, it can be a actual bath. I mean, it can be whatever it is that teaches you how to quiet the mind. That's what you need to do to open up that dopamine. And I've learned to not judge anymore, and I've learned to have my own little practice, and it's a lot of fun. So.
Oh, I love that. And it makes so much sense. And I guess that's what the path is. The path is what you want it to be for yourself. And I love the mothers and the others and the witches. And you're right. There are plenty of people who are very religious, and there's lots of different religions too, to just unpack that right there. But whether they're coming at it from a place where they have a belief in a higher power or they believe in their own power, it still gets them to where they need to be.
Exactly. Yeah, you quiet if you quiet the mind, there's a sense of, I always say science can be your thing as long as you understand that there's tons of mystery in science that we don't know. Whatever it is, it has to put you in a place, a little bit of humility so that you can be open to change. Because without humility to something like the science or God or whatever it is you believe in, you can't really be open to that change. And so it helps to open you up when you realize that, the universe that is so much bigger than you and has so many unanswered questions can be a great humbling experience.
Yeah, yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about, we all get sad, right? We all get stuck. We all get our moments where we're sitting on the couch in our yoga pants and Netflix and a bottle of wine. Can you, that's something that you had said to me,
Yeah,
by the
it's
way.
my
Which I
favorite
thought,
line.
yeah. So can you talk about your favorite line a little bit? Can you talk
Yeah.
about how that's okay once in a while?
Right. So you're not perfect. And actually, I just had what I call a path circle with a group of women, and we were talking about perfectionism. And that is the curse of our last couple generations. We focus on this facade because perfectionism is a facade. And the opposite of perfectionism is actually, I think, grit, believe it or not. So when you talk about perfectionism, you're talking about creating this and making it perfect. And so it can go up on social media. And then, I'm from the Angeli generation that said, I can bring home the bacon fried up in a pan and never let you forget you're a man. And so not only now am I doing all of the traditional work of a woman, but I have to do all the traditional work of a man as well. And I have to do it better than everybody else. And I have to do it perfectly. And then I have to put that all on my children. And then they have to grow up with this like severe perfectionism and social media. So everybody's really stuck on perfectionism. And the path breaks down all of that by saying none of that matters. The irony of working on mind, body, spirit and demystifying those things and making that your path is that you end up being a lot more perfect by not focusing on the things that you think make you perfect. So you develop your goals and your dreams and you sort of work a little bit on this and a little bit on that, and you fail at them 1,000 times. And that's totally fine. Then you get back up. And some days you suck at it. And that's also okay. And those are the days that maybe you take a little bit too much of the Netflix uh,
The bottle of wine and
bottle
the
of
yoga
wine, yeah.
pants.
Oh, and then also, yeah, and it's funny, like those days. So one of the really great, I think maybe this might have been what you were getting at too, is that one of the great things about um, understanding how those things affect you is that we actually have imaging science that can and blood draws that can show if you spend a night just kind of trashing yourself with ice cream and dopamine or what ice cream and dopamine, wine and Netflix, you really crash your dopamine levels. But you also can shut down the ability for those receptors because you're replacing all of your capacity to feel good with these chemicals. And as a result, you end up not being able to produce it, and it takes you like some time to get those receptors back. And so a lot of the work that we do focuses on waking up those dopamine receptors.
Yeah, and that's where the science really comes into play because you've researched this. There's plenty of people who have researched this, and you're bringing it all together. So, a lot of what the local priest might be saying, or the person down at the yoga studio might be saying, again, it's all the same stuff.
Well,
And
valid. Yes,
it's based on
yes.
science.
Yeah.
And this ties a little bit into this is why people who are addicted, who are addicts, because when they use again and again and again, their dopamine levels are just plummeted all the time. And it's really hard for them to get back up again, right?
Yeah, actually, the imaging science shows that 3 months into active addiction can deplete your dopamine levels completely. For some chemicals. So if you're talking about like cocaine is a really big dopamine gobbler, and of course narcotics can gobble up that note. But you know what? One of the biggest offenders is alcohol. So we all, every time you have a glass of wine, you wake up that next day and you feel a bit hollow. Those are your dopamine levels crashing, and there's nothing wrong with that, unless you're like doing it all day, every day. But if if you're aware of that, if you have sort of a sensibility of like, maybe I can replace that bottle of wine every night with something else. You can see the science behind it as opposed to thinking, well, I don't know, just you're tired. And it just gives you a little bit more introspection into how this stuff works. I like that you brought up the priest too, because I always, there's another story that I tell about, we always think we're the first generation to do anything. And I never think that because I always say things like, I'm pretty sure confession in like 900 AD began because a priest sat down with a wise woman in some tribe in pre-Christian Europe. And she was like, well, they have to unload their souls. It's a thing they have to do. And he's like, that's a really good idea. It's always been good for you. We just kind of know why that is true now.
Right. We just attribute it to being caused by different things or
Right.
yeah.
And that's fine. That's fine if that's how you get there. I have a little practice myself, and I used to be super judgy about other people, and because there was no reason, and I realized that it doesn't matter what's true. What matters is that you practice something that quiets your mind and creates the dopamine. So you can have a lot of fun with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the old saying about the elephant, right? We're all looking at the same elephant, but somebody might be holding the tail. Somebody might be looking at the ear, the trunk, but it's still the same thing. It's
That's
all the same
great.
elephant. You mentioned the path circle that you just did. Can,
Yes.
can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So, do I talk about where it was or?
Oh, I don't, I'm
Okay, so
curious.
there's a group called the Jane Club, and it's like the gym club. It's an online thing. It kind of exploded during COVID, and they invited me to do this. I do it. There's a friend of mine is doing it as well, but I do it once a week with a private group, and then I did it with them. And what we do is we go around and in this case, I introduced myself and sort of introduced what it is I do. And then we talked about our vulnerabilities and what's haunting us right now. And then we identify the kind of the theme of the room, and it was perfectionism. And then we picked a reading from, and I mean, I have really quick access to it. So I pick a reading and then we go around and discuss the intention from that reading.
Nice.
Yeah, it went really well. So
that sounds like a lot of fun. And just, again, it's another path to get you there. So I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit, Suzie, and talk about our healthcare system. As a healthcare professional and somebody who's done so much research and you've seen this over and over again, can you tell us why we suck as a healthcare
yes.
system?
Yes, I can. So we treat mental health as if it is a shameful social service problem. And we don't talk about the brain health, and we don't talk about the neuroscience behind it. And the healthcare system is even worse about this in terms of our ability to actually address it. So if you have someone who is a stroke victim, they get months of rehab to retrain their brain. But someone who is struggling with substance use disorder gets maybe an outpatient rehab center down the street. If you're lucky, you have something in your town that will do a detox. Maybe, I mean, it's utterly one of the largest problems in this country. Alcohol and drugs are one of the largest. The addiction is one of our largest healthcare problems, but we don't even have a centralized care of this at our hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
So one, we ignore the problem because there's an addict in Bay 4 and we don't want to talk about it. Does anybody know if that treatment center is accepting people? And this is how we handle it. Not because, and no one, it starts in the beginning because people don't learn. We don't learn this in school. I learned this all on my own through other means, through the work I've done and personally. I mean, I have learned all of this stuff outside of school. I teach people who are physicians in every field how to address substance use disorder. They do not get this training. Nobody gets this training because it's not really cohesive yet. If you look up, like for instance, a diabetic, if you look up online, you Google diabetes, you'll get the American Diabetic Association, and they set the standards as a professional group on how to treat diabetes. If you look up substance use disorder, you'll get a list this long of private treatment centers, which is fine because that's all we have, and great that they're out there. I think everybody can use treatment.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, they're not healthcare. Because it's a shameful social service problem. It's not actually, we don't cover the inpatient care that people need to rehab their brain. It can take months to get those dopamine levels back to a place where someone isn't hysterical. We're like, why'd they go back out? They were sober 8 months. Well, maybe their dopamine was at 70% or 60% and something happened and they just didn't have the capacity. They're like, well, they're not strong. I don't think that's the problem. I think if you look at the science, they need more time, and everybody's bodies are different. So if we were measuring dopamine levels and measuring and doing scanning to see where their brain were as far as the receptors go, then we would have a better understanding of the grit behind these people's ability to care for themselves. So I think it's really important that people begin to understand the science behind things like that. And this is true for so much mental health, right? We think, well, why don't they just get better? Or my favorite thing, here's a pill. Because that's going to solve your problem, and that's the problem. And a lot of places are trying, but until we as a centralized healthcare system, hospitals in particular, because that's where most people get the kind of the birthplace of all specialties, until hospitals accept that addiction medicine should be as legitimate as diabetes or a stroke, then we're never going to get anywhere.
It's so true. I mean, if you go and you get blood work done, they're checking your levels for this and that and everything else, but
Mhm.
they're not necessarily looking at your dopamine levels if
Right.
you're
No.
dealing with something like this. And
Right.
there's a few things I want to unpack there because you bring up a few interesting points. I do want to talk about overhauling the healthcare system, but then one of the things that I think is interesting is you also talk about this idea that it's shameful, that we should be, that people just automatically whisper about these situations. Why is it that people don't recognize it as what it is, a disease, and we have this tendency to talk about it in hushed whispers and have the feeling that people should just be strong and lift themselves up?
People still debate this in the literature, actually. There are still some naysayers that, oh, it's not a disease. And I'm not even sure how you can do that because, I mean, the genetics show that people with substance use disorder have less capacity to create dopamine to begin with. And and I think we did cover it, but saying it out loud, like if you are a normal person and you're just having a bad day, your dopamine levels might, like if this is the scale, they might be down this much.
Hmm.
You know, you're having a really bad, maybe you're super depressed, you're down this much. If you're someone who has no dopamine, imagine the hollow desperation, the things that you might do, the horror that you might put out there just to feel not good, not to feel good, but to feel normal.
Yeah.
So so I don't blame people for not getting it because what they have is Aunt Becky showing up and stealing, their mom's pearl necklace and pawning it off to get her drugs. That's what people's reality is. And that is the reality because when you feel like that, there's very little that your morals go right out the window. You're either going to kill yourself or you're going to get some more of that drug and you're going to get it now because that's the only thing that can replace those dopamine, that feeling, that hollow. And with the really funny part is people don't even realize that a lot of times in later stages of addiction, people, they're like, oh, you're acting so weird. It's because they're not on the drugs when they're acting weird. They
Mm.
actually only act normal when they are using because they are constantly replacing those chemicals. So, I mean, I understand that's why people, we don't teach it. So if we taught it, if we started teaching that, hey, this is why that is, and here's how we can help people, then people would understand that when that person showed up in the ER. But instead, they have Aunt Becky to depend on, and they're like, I know
Yeah.
her, that kind of feeling. And to
Yeah.
be honest, we're human too. Like, people with substance use disorder are a difficult lot. They're not exactly like, hey, I'm here. Can you help me? So there's a lot of that baggage that goes along with this disease.
Yeah. Now, is that why you say that we need a brain reboot?
Yes.
Is that, yeah, yeah.
So,
Um, yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. That's okay. I think you cut out on me just a little bit there.
No, so the brain reboot is if you talk about someone who has a stroke and we talked, they need the rehab, and you can't just say get better now. So with someone with substance use disorder, you can't just hit the button and the computer restarts. It takes months and months and months to train that brain to respond to other activities that create dopamine and endorphins. So if you had an ideal treatment center, you'd have a place that had an exercise outlet. And it doesn't have to be crazy exercise, right? It can be just walking or, a walking track or, a yoga room or something that allows people to just kind of move a little bit and start to learn how to create those endorphins.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
then you'll need the counseling, right? The unloading,
mhm,
the priest.
mhm.
And then you need to destigmatize the idea that a spiritual path is not healthy, that it's not actually creating dopamine. So we need to add that. Like, people are so afraid. I love reading the literature when people are trying to quantify a spiritual path. They're like, well, they have, this quality or this, and they'll have all these words and these tag words for it. And it's very funny because really it's like they are using their spiritual path to create dopamine. Great. Who cares? I don't care that it's a spiritual path. I think that's great. Like, that's how they get there. So that's how I get there. That's how a lot of people get there. And if it works, why are we balking at it? You know what I mean? If it's a treatment, what's the difference between that and meditation and prayer? You know what I mean? They're all kind of the same thing. So
yeah, exactly. And this leads into your ideas about overhauling the healthcare system, because people could go and do yoga, or they could go talk to their priest. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel that solution all entails? I mean, is it possible that we actually overhaul the healthcare system? That sounds like a pretty tall order.
it is. And it's not. And the problem, I mean, there's so many problems. I mean, we could start, it gets really complicated because you start by demonetizing the incentive to be in healthcare. And I mean, it's a lot of people are making a lot of money in healthcare, and somehow that feels very wrong to me. So if you were to take all of the recommendations that the United Nations have put out years ago through the World Health Organization and put that into practice, we'd have to have a national healthcare system. We'd have to have, a centralized system that determines how you treat mental health. And we're so far from that, I don't even know where to even begin with it. So my best hope is to sort of educate people and to sort of drive them towards understanding that there are ways to treat this. And they've successfully done it in countries like Portugal. And they've really overhauled how they treat substance use disorder and mental health in general. And not at that much cost. You know what I mean? Like, it's not at a cost, actually. They've actually saved community from so much criminal charges that it's a wash. I mean, societally, it's a wash. So that's very complicated stuff, though.
It is. And that's probably a topic for a whole entire show.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a lot going on there. And it kind of feeds into the idea of, I'm going to segue over into fear in the primitive brain, because you like to talk about that as well, because we don't want to make a move, right? We don't want to change the status quo. We want to keep things the way they are. And you have some thoughts about fear and our brains and how that works. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah. So I like to talk about that because taking the leap of faith and going on this journey and working towards becoming, which I love that term that everybody's using now, and that feeling of like becoming your best self. It's a leap of faith, and it requires you to let go of fear. If you are, fear is everything that you think that makes you afraid is from your primitive part of your brain. And that's great. Like, keeps you from, putting your hand in the
garbage disposal.
Yeah, garbage. Yeah.
Or picking up the cute snake and playing with the snake. Because, it's so cute.
Like, you don't go climb in the lion's den. So it keeps you safe. And it's great for like 10,000 years ago. If you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you run away without thinking. You don't have to stop and think. You're just, I'm afraid, and you run. And that's great. But currently, we don't have a lot of situations that require that kind of fear, but the brain still reacts that way because that's the way it was developed. So you have to train your brain to not land here. So you have to pull it out and put it in your frontal brain where you think logically. Most people say, trust your gut. I always say, check your gut. Your gut is your primitive brain telling you to have a fear reaction. Most of the time, those are irrational now. Because we are afraid of people who are different than us, or we're afraid of situations, or we're afraid of there's some sort of thing that reminds us of our fourth grade where that guy said something to us and it automatically puts us in a fearful position, or a family member who's treated you poorly your whole life, and everybody's that way. And you get afraid of situations as opposed to a saber-toothed tiger where that's useful. So what you have to do is when you have that gut reaction, don't trust your gut. Check it. Make sure that what you're feeling is logical. Pull it out of there and throw it up here. And sometimes you just have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's the most important part of that journey, because some of that stuff is going to be uncomfortable at first. The first time you meditate in a group, let me tell you something, everybody's, oh, what's going to happen? Are the meditation gods going to come down and smite you because you didn't do it right? You know what I mean? Like, it's so illogical. Like, you're sitting in a room with people who meditate regularly and you're like, oh my God, is anybody watching? Nobody's watching you. They're meditating. They don't care what you're doing. They're doing breathing exercises. It's really, really good for you. So don't worry what anybody else is doing. But I think that's the kind of thing that fear, it's back here. It's a fear of, Betsy from the fifth grade who said something nasty to you when you were like feeling real big and wanting to do something. And she's put that right here, and you're worried what those people are thinking all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and unfortunately, we have a world right now where there's a lot of people that are using fear to divide us and pull us apart in so many ways. But it's empowering when you confront it. And like you said, use reason, use a little bit of logic to confront your own fear. It's going to get you a lot farther.
I would also argue anger and fear are very much the same thing. So if you have a lot of anger at something, it's the same thing. And I hate that about myself, because whenever I'm angry, I always have to go, okay, what's my problem? Because I know 90% of the time it's an irrational response, anger is. And it has to do with protecting you from yourself. So same thing.
It has to do with protecting yourself from yourself?
Yeah. So if you're angry, a lot of times it's because you're afraid. And so you're lashing out in fear, but you are afraid to look at the thing that you are afraid of. So your mind protects you from yourself.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you, in writing this beautiful book, putting this together, by the way, that there's art in here, and I just passed it. It's just gorgeous. It's absolutely a stunning book. It's something that you can put on the coffee table.
I'm very proud of it.
It's just amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So, Suzie, can I talk about your path in writing this book and putting it all together? What did you learn about yourself in being a writer?
Oh, I learned. So I feel like it was a bit magical. I learned I'm okay. I know that sounds really funny, but so many people, I have been really 19, I think, was the first time I got help. And so I've been on a mental health journey my whole life. And people will meet me and have no idea the things that have been in my history, they'll be like, oh, you're so normal. I'm like, well, yeah, no. So, when everybody we started this project in the beginning of COVID, and everybody, my daughter had just moved home from New York City, had lost everything in 3 days. I mean, she was a performer, and life just crushed. I mean, just completely crushed. She had friends there who had lost everything, that stayed behind, were telling her how the streets were empty, and it was haunting and weird, especially those people in New York. I mean, that beginning of COVID in New York was the real deal. And so I had this mental health issue right in my basement, and I, from a woman who hadn't any intention of moving home and had never moved home. She had been on her own and everything was fine. And then all of a sudden there was nothing. So it really struck me that I had, and then back up a couple years before that, I had my sister had died of an overdose. And I always had wondered why I was able to get better and she wasn't. And I really focused in on that shame. I really feel like it was the shame of her disease and her inability to face that and get help that really kept her from getting better. And so all of those things had happened, and I was back in school getting my doctorate, and I had been running this group that was for mothers and others in recovery. And I was talking to my husband. I'm like, this stuff is not just for people with substance use disorder. This is really for everyone. This is simple science. And the more investigation you do, the more you see, like, here's a normal person who's drinking and their dopamine drops this much. I'm like, well, that can't feel good. You know what I mean? It's not down here, but like, honest to God, you got to feel pretty bad after and then I started thinking and we had lots of conversations like that. And I realized, it was COVID. I had an artist in my basement, and I had a collection of artists that were unemployed through her. And it was organic then. And I learned when I wrote it that I believe everything that I'm saying. Like, I'm not full of it. Like, it was like the final piece in validating the work I've been doing for so long.
Oh, I love that story. It's amazing. And again, it's an amazing book.
It's a COVID story, right? It's like one of those things where...
Yeah, it is. It is. But it's beautiful. And it's so great the way your daughter, and like you said, these creative people who were just kind of like thrown for a loop, how you came together and you created something together.
Yes.
And it's done so much to help people. You've taken something that was a negative and just twisted it. And I love that. Suzie, can you tell people where they can go to find you online, your website, social media? How can people...
So I am everywhere. I am most active on Facebook and Instagram at The Path 365. There's a website, thepath365.com. I'm trying to do TikTok. I'm working it. I'll be better about it. I'll be better. I'm getting better. And then I have a Twitter. I'm very absent on Twitter, but I'm starting. So any social media outlet or that I know of, right? And thepath365.com. And you can get the book there now. It will be on Amazon and Kindle on April 26th.
Fabulous, fabulous. Suzie Newell, author of The Path 365. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Thank you so much.
You bet. You bet. And thank you everybody for joining us as well. You can find out more about us on our website. That's booksthatmakeyou.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram and that TikTok place as well. We do things over there too.
Oh yeah, I do. I have TikTok.
It's fun, right?
I know it is. Yeah. I like having the conversations. It's just people don't realize how much work that stuff is.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. All of this is a lot of work, like you said. But then when you give yourself permission to not be perfect, that makes it feel so much easier.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, my friends. Thank you again for joining us on the Books That Make You show. Make sure you do subscribe to us on YouTube. Ring the bell so you never miss a thing. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of the books that make you who you are.
The host and executive producer of the Books That Make You show is Desiree Duffy. Sound mastering and engineering by Dave Napox. Social media and content promotion by Siddhi Jahagirdar. Copywriting and editing by Mike Robinson. The Books That Make You show is an award-winning podcast produced by Black Chateau Enterprises.